Hello and welcome to Orion's Incident Room at the Theakston Old Peculiar Crime Writing Festival in Harrogate. Maybe you've visited it before, you've seen the outline of tape where the body is on the floor and what have you. And obviously for COVID reasons, we can't all be there with you this weekend, but we have managed to find for you two of the world's biggest, most respected, and my favorite writers to do this final session in the incident room for you this weekend. We have Mike Connelly, who is fresh from the set of the latest Bosch adventure that he's been filming. And we got Steve Cavanagh, who joins us just ahead of the August release of The Devil's Advocate, which I've been reading in the run-up to this and which you're going to love, by the way. It's Steve's finest book to date. Gentlemen, how are you both?
Very good.
All good. Yeah,
good. It's so exciting to have you both here. And Mike, especially because I know you've been working all the hours, haven't you, on this new Bosch show. So thanks for making time for us. How are you doing?
I'm good. We've been working the middle of the nights all week, and a lot of people are on the crew are upset saying, like, who wrote this stuff? And then they all look at me. So, I've learned a screenwriter's lesson. Don't do a lot of night stuff, because you end up working 12 hours, 5 to 5, and it's not so great.
And this is just to clarify, is this a Bosch prequel show? Just remind us what this is.
It's a spinoff from the show that just ended. In my books, Bosch goes from being a cop with a badge to being a private eye, and now we're doing the private eye stories, I guess, if you will, with a kind of a different tone and look and so forth. And it's jumping to another network as well.
So I was thinking about the common ground you guys share, apart from both being amazing writers. And if we take your last book, Mike, Law of Innocence, it's a Mickey Haller book. It's a Lincoln lawyer book. And obviously with Eddie Flynn, Steve, Eddie's a lawyer, although he's a lawyer with a twist, isn't he? I mean, again, I'm going to assume that you're watching this and you're at the Harrogate Festival, so you've got a bit of knowledge of both of these writers. So I'm not going to spend too much time introducing you to their characters. You can have a quick Google if you're not familiar with their work. But Eddie Flynn's a former con man, isn't he? And I love the fact that, you know, he can still do that whilst practicing law, and it comes in really useful in The Devil's Advocate, Steve.
Yeah, he does. And I think similarly to Mickey Haller, Mickey's not adverse to pulling a few fast moves, for his clients. And I think a lot of lawyers are like that. But it was a character that I hadn't seen a lot of, when I started writing. So I wanted to focus on that and to say, look, it's not all, righteous men in white suits standing up for people,
Yeah.
Usually whilst Eddie has a strong moral core, he's not adverse to pulling a few moves if it helps his client. And
when you just said a lot of lawyers are like that, we should explain to Harrogate, you're speaking from some personal experience, aren't you?
Yeah, I used to be a lawyer. I'm now a recovering lawyer. So I'm in rehab. I'm almost a human being again. So I'm going through that process, but it's great. I don't have to get up in the morning anymore, crazy hours and work crazy hours anymore. So that's a lot of fun. And there's a lot less crazy people in my life now that I'm not a lawyer. So it's all good.
And when you started then, you said there weren't many characters like Eddie or like Mickey Haller. As a reader and as a viewer, I would say that I was seeing a lot of, before you guys came along, I was seeing a lot of kind of objection, overruled, you can't handle the truth. Do you know what I mean? It's that kind of approach to, whereas I wouldn't necessarily say it's sassier, but it's almost sharper and it feels more real. Was that important to you, Steve, having been in court in Northern Ireland, we should say as well? And your books are always set in the States, but yeah. There's a more realistic, even though Eddie Flynn's pulling a pickpocket or two, do you know what I mean? It feels more real.
Yeah, that's something that I felt I could bring to the books is, this is really how a cross-examination works. And it's not, like that Tom Cruise movie. We watched A Few Good Men the other night, Tracy and I. It's a great movie, but some of the courtroom scenes are a bit ridiculous. They're pretty poor. They're very dramatic and they're great to watch, but that's not really how it goes. Whereas with Eddie, he sort of takes the reader by the hand and say, look, here's the tricks that we really pull. And here it's a battle of words. Every word is a weapon in court. And here's how it's all used. And you're leading a witness down a blind alley till it gets narrower and narrower and narrower and they're trapped. And then you spring the killer question, things like that. But you see this, like it's the same thing in Mike's books. And I know Mike speaks to to real lawyers, really good lawyers, because the cross-examination scenes in the Mickey Haller books are absolutely first class. And and as I'm reading them, I'm going, I can see where he's going with this. Maybe where other readers might not.
Right.
I can see 5 or 6 questions ahead. I can say, all right, I know he's shutting off doors here, and this is all really good. So I love that.
Mike, just pick up on that, because I know from interviewing you before that you do have, I wouldn't say an army of trusted contacts, but certainly you've got people that you go to in the field, haven't you, to make sure you get these things right?
Yeah, with the Lincoln lawyer stuff, I basically have a couple lawyers. He's really an amalgamation of 2 guys who at one time were partners, and so I could just go to one office and talk to them both, or they'd both be together at the bar after work. Steve's compliment to me really goes to them, because they would sketch out these, God, what's going on behind me? It's like a fog, an evil fog.
Yeah, do you know, I'm glad I thought someone was having an early barbecue in LA.
No, it's like, wow, it's a really thick fog, which is unusual in LA. But anyway, so these lawyers usually work out the cross-examinations for me, and then I do a little bit of writing flair with them. But the stuff Steve's saying, I really like that idea of like you're going down an alley that's getting narrower and narrower, and it all goes to character that they've planned it. The Mickey Haller or Flynn have planned this, and and it's a slow reeling in of somebody into a word trap, basically, or maybe a perjury trap or something where they have no choice but to give up what Haller or Flynn are trying to get out in the open.
Now, something else that both of these books have in common, so with the last Haller and with Steve's new one, The Devil's Advocate, is that you've put your protagonists in no-win situations. So with Haller, it seems like, even though we know, because we love him, he's ours, we know he hasn't committed a murder. All the evidence shows he has, right? And with Eddie Flynn, he's been persuaded to take on this case, Steve. He's got no chance of winning because it's in a corrupt part of Alabama. And so, Mike, to you first, and Steve then secondly on this, how interesting is it for you guys to put your protagonists in kind of no-win situations? Is that the real challenge?
Yeah, it's as you said, you got to assume that even if no one's even read a Lincoln lawyer book, if they pick this book up, they're going to know, why would the guy write about a guy who actually did this murder? So you start with the given that they know he didn't do it, but that he's in such a tight box that hopefully the ride or the joy in reading is to figure out how he's going to get out of it. And that becomes the fun of it.
Steve?
Turning the tables.
That's it, yeah. It's the same. I think, on some level, the reader knows, okay, well, like there's got to be some way that they're going to get out of this. And it's just how is that going to work, I think that's not the big problem for me. The big problem is trying to make the reader care about each situation, so they're emotionally invested. And it's not just on an intellectual level, so that it's for the reader to want the character to get out of this terrible situation. And how do I do that? How do I make them really invested and cheering on the protagonists?
But one of the ways I think as a reader that you both achieve that is giving them a supporting cast of characters that I really adore. And we should probably talk about the investigators that both lawyers have and how they came to your worlds and how you put them in. And Steve, I'll start with you. Now I'm going to say Block, but you might call her something else.
No, it's Block.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Block's an interesting character. She was a sheriff in a standalone novel, Twisted, and I really liked her. She's kind of on the the ASD spectrum somewhere.
Right. She
doesn't talk too much, and when she says things, usually it's things people don't like to hear. She's very blunt, but she's a brilliant investigator, and I liked her a lot. And she's interesting. She's younger than Eddie. She's more in the hooked up with the modern world, and she's a gay character too, which is interesting to write about. So I brought her into 50-50 as a friend of the other lawyer in there, Kate, and they sort of team up in this book. So Eddie has a wider team, a Block as its investigator, and she complements, because Eddie's quite fast talking and Block says nothing, and it's just a kind of a bit of a badass, but she has this real insight. She'll spot something unusual. and then we'll be able to say it. So she's a real interesting character for me.
And for you, Mike, with Mickey.
Yeah, I'm Steve's a recovering lawyer. I'm a recovering journalist. So most of my characters are really usually drawn from real people that I've met. As I mentioned, the two lawyers were the inspiration for the Lincoln lawyer. And their investigator, Cisco, I used to do a lot of book touring. I'd go on the road for like a month. And there was a mystery bookstore in Milwaukee that I went to every year. And there was always this guy there, and he looked like a biker, and he even wore the leather vest and stuff. And I got to know him. It's like once a year I would see this guy, and then we started having beers and stuff after I do the book signing. And it turned out he was a private eye, and he was a former associate of a motorcycle gang, and he actually worked for a lawyer. So it's like a true story. So once again, I'm inspired by someone I really met. And so even though this guy's in, and he's known as Cisco, that was his motorcycle gang name. And his name is Dennis Wojciechowski. I used his name, his nickname. I used the description of him, everything. But transplanted him to LA to work for Mickey Haller. And so that's the journalist in me. I like to go to the real people and say, like, how would you handle this? Or they tell me stories about cases that I put into books.
But then you've got to make sure that these aren't documentaries you're writing, right? So you need some of the facts that you would have acquired as a journalist, and then it's how much of that do you decide to include, and how much you can't include because it might just be dull.
Yeah, I mean that's where my skill comes in. Like I think I have a journalist's eye for throwing out a net and getting interesting things, but I have to be a slave to drama and character, and so that, I go off the stories to build in what I need and what I hope the reader's looking for and what the reader needs to keep a certain velocity in the story.
So in Law of Innocence,
Steve can respond to this because he's actually been in the box, as I call it. When you write legal thrillers, everything kind of usually leads to a box, a courtroom. And that's one of the biggest challenges. Like when I'm writing about Harry Bosch, he's out there and he's chasing killers or whatever. But a legal drama, you end up in a courtroom, and it's hard to generate momentum and surprise and all those things without leaving that room. And I think that's what's the skill that people like Steve who write legal thrillers, that's what they have. They have a way, and with Steve, it comes from experience for sure, of getting the reader into that box and not wanting, and then the reader doesn't want to leave,
Yeah, well, thanks very much. That's the thing. I think I've been in court where I've been bored to tears, and I'm sitting there and it's awful. But when there's a real dramatic moment, there's nothing like it. It's a weird thing, our trial process, where you have someone who is lying, or maybe someone who's telling the truth. And there are these people who have just these techniques of being able of picking all of that apart and saying, well, it's a real battle of wits. But conducting a cross-examination is a nightmare. I've done it myself many, many times. And, you have a book of 10,000 pages of evidence. The witness is saying something. In your mind, you have your questions planned out, or your rough route, plotted out to get to your little narrow corridor. And you have to listen to what they're saying, take that in, adjust what you're going to ask them, and have everything in mind that they've said before and what everyone else has said before. So I think you can learn to do it competently, but the people I've seen who can do it well, you can't be taught that. There's just some kind of a genius thing. And I was sort of competent in that I didn't make too many mistakes. But the people who can do it brilliantly well, it's an incredible thing to watch. And if I can capture any of that, on the page, then I think I've done well.
Well, I'll let you watching into a secret, because Steve's book is now out till August, but what he's just told you on this is in the book. There's a scene I read it this afternoon where Eddie says he wakes up to have another go at all the files they've got so far, because he says you've got to know it inside out so that you can spot whether people are trying to pull a fast one on you or not. So that's obviously direct from your experience.
Oh yeah, you have to. There's a lot of laborious. For every 5 minutes you have in court, there's an hour's work there.
And were you a prosecutor, Steve, or a defender, or did you do a bit of both?
I started off, I was in a large civil defense firm. So we worked for insurance companies, and I defended various large companies. If they had an accident at work, there was a car accident, or there was transport companies as well. So rail crashes. And I started as an investigator. And then I qualified as a lawyer there, and I worked there for about 8 years, and then I gave up. And I worked in a very small firm then where I was representing ordinary people. And I was suing the insurance companies, and I got to do criminal work as well. And I was sort of doing everything. But it was great because it was very small cases you handled for people, and then huge, big, cases. So it was good experience, and it's much better, giving ordinary people money who have deserved it and you've won it for them, rather than saving some insurance company. So I was kind of gamekeeper turned poacher. And I loved doing that. And I did a lot of, equality law, the race discrimination and sex discrimination cases, disability discrimination as well. So I had a huge gamut of things, about 200 cases at any one time, which is a lot of plates to keep moving.
Yeah.
But it was good fun, very rewarding.
And going back to what Mike was just saying about courtroom scenes and the difficulty of those, as we're at a Crime Writers Festival, Mike, you go first on this. Who else writes good courtroom scenes? Who do you like reading?
There's a lot. I mean, I when I read Steve's stuff, I'm always fascinated that he's setting stuff in the USA and that he gets it because the justice systems are quite different. So when I read his books, I have a kind of like a tip of the hat to another writer. I mean, the books are great by themselves, and a reader who does not write like I do should have no issues at all. But it's kind of like Lee Child, writing about America and getting to the heart of America. I would, liken it to that. Other guys, there's a guy named John Hart. I'm sure Steve read him. He does a lot of criminal stuff in the kind of the South of the United States. I like his stuff, but there's a lot of people out there who are doing this. And whenever I get asked this question, names go out of my head. The lady who writes about Philadelphia, and she was a prosecutor in Philadelphia. I can't think of her name offhand, so I guess that's a bad answer.
Steve, what about you?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I know the lady you're talking about now. I'm trying to think. Is it Lisa Scottolini?
Yeah, that's it.
She's great.
I was about to say she has an Italian name. So
yeah. She's great. There's a writer, John Lasqua, who's good. And John Grisham, when he does a courtroom scene, he doesn't often do courtroom scenes, but when he does, he's really good. So there's lots of them. The British writer John Mortimer, who was a QC, the late John Mortimer, his Rumpel of the Bailey series, very different. They're not legal thrillers, they're sort of dramas about a barrister. But his courtroom scenes were always brilliant and very funny.
Now, let me ask you about your current books then. So, Steve, the Devil's Advocate, when I put that into Google earlier this afternoon, it brought up the Al Pacino film. Yeah. First of all. And so I thought, did you have any qualms about naming your book after such a well-known film?
I did, but it's a phrase, it's a popular phrase, I'll play devil's advocate.
Yeah.
Right.
And it really comes from, it was a job in the Vatican. So when they were going to have the beatification of saints, when they're going to make someone a saint, they have a hearing, they have a trial. So the first thing is they wait until the person's been dead for 5 years. Then they dig up the person, they cut off their head and their arms and put them somewhere in the Vatican. No one knows where or really why they do this. And then they have a trial. And there is someone there, usually a canon, someone who's experienced in canon law, or an archbishop, someone like that, would be the devil's advocate. And they would say, well, this person shouldn't be a saint. Now, Pope John Paul II did away with this position, but they still had people in as devil's advocates, avocatus diabolic, I think is what they call it. And the last two people, there was an Indian lecturer and Christopher Hitchens, who were both devil's advocates for Mother Teresa when they were going to decide if she was going to be a saint, because there was lots of, Hitchens was saying this, the millions she raised, very little of that went to help the poor people. That all went to the church. And she was more of a friend to poverty rather than a friend to the poor. So it was a real thing, but it fit the book, and we hemmed and hawed about this, and there was about 70 different titles, but that's the one I wanted. So I think it fits, and it's different enough because it deals with a really bad prosecutor who's based kind of a wee bit based on real people. I found an incredible thing about statistic about death penalty cases. 2% of the counties in the US are responsible for almost 20% of the total death row population.
Wow.
And so death row cases are driven by personalities, because often when these people leave office, if they're voted out as DA, the capital murder rate just plummets. There's a lot of these cases, it's just the prosecutor's discretion to make it a capital murder case or not. And there's people that they just want to kill people. Really, it's terrifying. So I found out about these people. And I thought, well, this is a book. I have to write about them. And The Devil's Advocate fits very well.
But I mean, we also use that phrase, and we also, I could kill them. But I mean, not many of us actually want to see that through.
You skipped over a big part. Why did they cut off the head and the arm?
Yeah.
No one knows why they do that. I think it's to preserve, because there's a wee bit of that happens in Catholicism. Oliver Plunkett's head is in Drogheda Church, if you ever want to see Oliver Plunkett's head. I
mean, to be fair, I do that with my gingerbread men before I beatify them.
They cut off their heads and their arms. And sometimes the heads are displayed. Who knows?
Wow. That's weird, isn't it?
Isn't it weird? There's all sorts of stuff goes on there. No one's any clue what they're up to.
Mike, as we join you, and we mentioned the TV show earlier, but you kind of between books, really, like The Law of Innocence is out now in paperback, and then when you next return certainly to these shores, will be with Ballard and Bosch, won't it, for The Dark Hours, which I think we're getting in hardback on the 9th of November. So what do we get from The Dark Hours? Set this up for us.
It's funny. I just turned that in, so I'm waiting on the editing. So it could dramatically change in editing. but the story I turned in, around the world, the world's changed, because of the pandemic. But in the United States, we've also had the George Floyd thing that has upended, excuse me, and changed a lot about relations with police and so forth. So I always try to set my books in the year they come out. So this book I started in January, so I actually started with New Year's Day, and it's about the first murder of the year in Los Angeles. And Ballard catches this case, and she's kind of a lone wolf in the police department, but she has Bosch as a mentor. So he comes into the story later on. But it's, that's the excuse I'm using to kind of describe what's going on in policing in the United States at the moment, and which is not a lot. There's just no, what's happened because of the protests and rightfully so, and the eye and the cameras and everything put on policing right now. Almost nothing's getting done, and it's like policing by desk, and that goes against the character of Ballard. She's a very proactive investigator, and so it's really about her trying to investigate a murder and getting no help from her own department. So in a way, she becomes a private detective, and so it's a mystery and all that kind of stuff, and that's probably what I should be telling you about. But the secret motivations of the writer behind this book were to say this is where we're at now, and a reflection of our times.
And when you say nothing's getting done, what do you mean? The police are kind of withdrawing a little bit because they're frightened of repercussions?
I would say withdrawing a lot, not a little bit.
Right.
Especially LAPD, and this is where they get into trouble. I mean, LAPD needs to be reformed. But it's always been a proactive department. Now it's a reactive department. And if you're a reactive department, you just don't, you see something, you don't do anything about it. You don't want to get out of your car because someone might have a phone and they're filming you. Every interaction. I mean, you see this. I just saw this yesterday where we were filming in downtown, and I went over to get a cup of coffee at a place, and I saw the cops arresting somebody, and there's like 4 people just filming it. And so I think all the cops, I think the cops feel like they've been abandoned, that they don't have the support of the community, because there were massive protests in Los Angeles, and as there were in most big cities in the United States. And I think they feel like they're adrift, and there's why should I risk my life when it's not really valued by this community? I'm not saying that's right. I'm saying that's their viewpoint.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah, because you'll be the counter viewpoint is that, thank heavens that was captured on film, or that officer would still be serving.
Yeah. I mean, he captured a murder on film, but I think any gigantic bureaucracy is like a aircraft carrier. It's hard to change its course. And so we're in this stage, I think, and I think LA is probably a microcosm of most big cities, at least in the United States. It's like they don't feel like they should change, and they have to change. The community, the population is not accepting it anymore, and so we're at this kind of standstill. And when I say standstill, it is standing still. There's lots of stuff that's not being done. There's lots of enforcement that's not being done. So that's kind of the backdrop, and it's not good for in real life for a community, but when you're writing fiction and you have a character that has this kind of challenge, it's kind of like it's a cop called for backup and no one came. That's essentially what it's like.
Mm.
And so I think that's good ground for a Ballard story, and that's what I turned in. We'll see what comes out.
And Steve, same spectrum, slightly different way you've chosen to cover it, but the backdrop to your story in Devil's Advocate is a fair degree of white supremacy, isn't it?
Yeah. There was a thing, I think it was in New York Times last year, the FBI and the NSA said the number one threat to the United States is white supremacists. And I had this book with dealing with a lot of that. And so I was a wee bit scary. But yeah, there's a lot of that going on in America. And I think people feel more empowered to expose those horrendous views. I don't think it's a new thing. I think it was probably always there. But I think since Trump and that type of politics, a lot of people have maybe felt empowered. The KKK is on the rise. All of this is happening. And I write about a society called the White Camellia, which was a real white supremacist society in the 1870s. But unlike the KKK, it wasn't poor white farmers and people like that. These were judges and wealthy landowners. These are all the people with power and influence. And I've sort of thought, well, let's bring that back now, because that's a little microcosm for some of the things that are going on in America.
And Mike very astutely observed earlier how everything you do set in the States, and you get all the law right and all the rest of it. So how are you doing that, especially with no travel at the moment? I presume you couldn't travel to research it, so you're all literally relying on the internet.
I'm relying on the internet, and thankfully all the laws there, and especially death penalty stuff, you have to be right. So in Alabama, you can choose between, if you find yourself, on death row, you can choose between the electric chair and the needle lethal injection. And it seems to be a trend that a lot of people are choosing the electric chair, since there were some botched executions with lethal injection, and they say that's more painful now, and witnesses have said that's more painful and traumatic. But there are people like a few people who know about the book have said, really, the electric chair is still going today? And yeah, it is. There was someone executed this year, I think, in the electric chair. So, but there's lots of legal nuances. So, for example, if it's a capital murder case, and Michael know this because it's in Riverside in Los Angeles as well. If you're going to be on a jury, you have to be death qualified, which means that you can't object to the death penalty. Really,
yeah, you've got to be amenable to death being an option.
Yes. So all the jury selection is: can you kill this man with no problem? Not is he innocent or is he guilty in the first place, but are you going to be able to do this? And lots of people say no. And the people who are excluded generally from death qualified juries are women and African Americans and Catholics. So you have a jury largely made up, as far as they can get away with it, with white Republican Protestants. And the best will in the world, that's not a jury of your peers for a lot of people who are on trial. So I'm trying to deal with all of these things, and again, make the book entertaining. You can't get on your soapbox all the time. Occasionally I climb up on my soapbox in a book, but usually I get down quite quickly after.
But I found that part of the novel really, really interesting as well. Mike, I think I'm right in saying I saw some figures that just before Donald Trump left office, on his watch, the greatest number of people have been executed on any modern president's watch.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. I can't confirm that, but that doesn't surprise me at all.
That's right. For the first time since, I think, before Nixon, federal executions were more than state executions. There's a lot of state executions stopped during the pandemic and said, look, this is too, we're going to kill lots more than just one person here with COVID. Whereas the federal system, Trump was driving that on, and lots of people were executed. I know
just yesterday, Biden stopped all federal execution.
Yeah,
his attorney general.
Just right too. He was. I know. He was sounding on that, and thank goodness, because it was frightening.
So, given what we've just spent 10 minutes discussing, does this feel like an extraordinary time for both of you as fiction writers, where clearly a lot of what's happening to all of us is influencing what's going into your fiction? I mean, Mike, if we'd have done this into you 10 years ago about a Bosch book, would you have had the same levels of influence? It just was different stories, or not?
Well, I think I've always, maybe because of my journalism background, I've always thought, like, if I'm going to do this, do more than just the puzzle of who did it. Use your soapbox or whatever you want to call this platform, not to be didactic, not to tell anyone how to think, but to put stuff out there and say, this is what's going on. Like so going all the way back to 9/11, so 20 years ago, they rushed in with the Patriot Act, which, allowed all kinds of denial of civil rights. And I had the FBI arrest Harry Bosch. So, I mean, I think I've been taking what's going on and putting into my books all along, but there is a heightened sense of, we got to do something about this. The Trump years just really changed everything, in my opinion. And it's just very hard not to put something in a book that says this is where we're at. I mean, in Law of Innocence, my last book, Haller is picking a jury, and he has, Steve was talking about guys, that make moves, I think he said. So he is a Cisco in the jurors' parking lot, trying to figure out who people are by what they drive and what their bumper stickers say. And so he knows kind of what he shouldn't know, and that is that one of these potential jurors has a Trump 2020 sticker on her car, and he rejects her for that. And that is a valid thing. I mean, in real life, a defense attorney would not want a Trump supporter, because it's what Steve just said. These are largely white Republican people that have a certain law and order view. There's no excuse. You cross the line, go away for the rest of your life or whatever. And so I wasn't making a political statement. I was making a realistic statement. But whatever you call that stuff that happens on the internet, and people like, barking at me and, I'm done with you and no more reading of your books and all this stuff, just because I'd said something that was actually a realistic thing. There wouldn't be a defense attorney in America who wouldn't make that same choice if he knew that potential juror had a Trump stick. So,
and actually, just on that same thing, Stephen, I pulled a line out from your book, which I thought chimed with what Mike was just talking about, where Eddie says there's very little anyone can do to counter facts in a courtroom, at least. And I thought, because there's this kind of post-truth world that you're both operating in, we're all operating in.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, it's hard to ignore what's going on. And I think a part of me really wants to put stuff in the book now about it. Whereas before I was more kind of, let's just tell the story. Now I am much more inclined to say, well, look, there is something really bad going on here, and look at it. Again, make your own mind up about it, but have no doubt this is what's going on. This is how awful it is. And I've never done this before. There's an author's note at the end of my book, which goes into a wee bit about, the real things that happened, which have influenced the book, like the White Camellia and stuff like this. But there's a thing, John Lewis, the civil rights activist and congressman who passed away, there was a quote from him to say, if you see something that's really wrong, you have a moral obligation to say, no, that's not right. And I think that's more and more in people's minds nowadays. So
it's all got a bit heavy in it. We need to wrap it up, and I feel like the old adage of showbiz is we should leave them on a song or something. Let's kind of find a less bleak way to end the session. I suppose what we should do is just end it on how much fun you're both having, despite the hard work. You are both getting to do what you love, right? And Steve, this book for you, how much fun was it for you to actually complete? And is there a chance? I mean, it's very visual, this, to me. If there's not a film in the works yet, there should be.
Yeah, well, I don't know about that. What's happening with that, really, to be honest? I'm not allowed to say for some bizarre reason. So
does that something's happening and you can't tell us, or nothing's happening and you can't tell us?
I'm hoping nothing's happening, to be honest, because I don't know anything about it. But
because I can exclusively reveal to you, no, I've got nothing.
Oh, no, don't do that. You have fun. Making up stories and writing about characters that you've written about for a while is great. And it's a challenge, and it's a good escape, from what's going on now. So it's good fun.
And is it still fun, Mike, even though you've only had 3 hours kip as we speak to you today, and you're kind of juggling a new Bosch TV and you're juggling the imminent release of the next Bosch and Ballard?
Of course. I mean, you're right. I mean, we got into this thing where, like, woe is me. We, as writers, we carry the weight of the world. We don't. I mean, just being able to sit in a room and, figure out how Mickey Haller looks at the world, or how he's going to attack a case, how he's going to defend himself in my latest book. It's so much fun, I mean, we're so lucky that we get to do this, and I remind myself of that. I mean, I don't have to remind myself. I live it every day. It's a very fortunate life, and so, and that's why it turns into, like, I've been given this opportunity, and not many people get it. So, do something with it. Have something that has a little bit of resonance and is not about simply who did it. Take your story and make it move across something like white power and things like that. Why not? Why not deliver mystery with a message, or mystery with a question? And that is, there's fun in that as well. So I wouldn't trade this for anything.
Look, thank you to you for watching this, and I know the guys would really have loved to have been at Harrogate in person. If hopefully next year maybe we might all be able to do that. Have you been over yet, Mike, to Harrogate, and have you had the pleasure of staying at the Old Swan, the hotel where Agatha Christie reappeared after going missing?
I have been to Harrogate. I actually went to the first Harrogate, but it was before they were at the Swan.
And Steve, I met you for the first time at the Swan, but actually, if we're being factually accurate, it was the tent at the back of the Swan where you and Tracy were enjoying the liquid refreshment.
Yeah. It's Harrogate's great fun, and it's just a shame I can't be there this year. But hopefully next year, when things have calmed down and we're not in the middle of Boris Johnson trying to kill us all, then it would be fine to go back. Should say, Phil, your background is not unlike some parts of the Swan.
Yeah, I've got the Faulty Towers bar as my background.
Well, the Swan's much nicer.
I thought I recognized that.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Don't mention the war.
The thing I like most about the Swan is when I was walking down the long corridor to my room, it is like you would film it for one of your programs, Mike. It's like it just feels like it goes on forever. And it's quite dark, and the floorboards all creak. And this is at 4 PM, you know. Never mind going to bed.
It's good fun, Harrigan.
Yeah.
You'll like it.
Forward to coming back to it.
Listen, gentlemen, thank you so much. Let's do the facts and figures on this before we all depart. The Law of Innocence is out right now in paperback, and that's the latest Lincoln lawyer thriller from Michael Connelly, the Mickey Haller book, which is brilliant, as you would expect from Mr. Connelly. The Dark Hours, due 9th of November here in the UK, the next Ballard and Bosch adventure. And Steve's book, which I'm halfway through, but I've told him prior to talking to you, this is, in my view, his best book yet. It's called The Devil's Advocate, and that's out here on the 5th of August, the latest in the Eddie Flynn series. And if you want to check out the others, the last one last year was 50/50, which is also really good. Gentlemen, thank you. It's, you know, well, you just know I love you both, don't you? You know that.
Thank you, Phil, for doing it. You're always great at these things.
Oh, wow. It's because it's just a pleasure. It's a pleasure. The last thing you want is for me to call you in the Swan Bar, because you'll never get away, I'm telling you. Let me just also thank the amazing team at Orion Publishing who made this happen, and especially the wonderful Alex Late for coordinating the Incident Room. And we can forgive her for being an Arsenal fan because she did such a great job on the Incident Room, and all the team at the Theakston Old Peculiar Crime Writing Festival. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as we have, and we will say goodbye.